What if the black stars you idolized growing up spent their lives afraid to love openly? The voices that shaped music, the faces that reshaped Hollywood, the men who made you laugh, cry, and dream big. For decades, they smiled on stage, posed for the camera, played the roles the world wanted them to, all the while hiding a truth so dangerous at the time that it could have destroyed their careers overnight. Their stories are more complicated, more heartbreaking, and more powerful than the headlines ever made. And by the end of this video, you may never listen to their songs or watch their movies the same way again. When we talk about the birth of rock and roll, we talk about Little Richard. He didn't just sing, he set the stage on fire. With every scream, every piano smash, every jewel-encrusted suit, he pushed boundaries in ways no one else dared. Millions of fans idolized him, copied his look, stole his sound, and built entire careers around the musical blueprint he created. But there's one thing they rarely talk about, something the industry, and even Little Richard himself, spent their lives trying to erase: his sexuality. Little Richard wasn't just closeted, he was locked in a constant battle between desire and denial. From an early age, he knew he was different. Growing up in Macon, Georgia, in the 1930s and 40s, being black was dangerous. But being black and gay, it was a sentence society would not forgive. Richard's strict religious upbringing had drilled into him one thing: homosexuality was a sin. His father, a church deacon by day and nightclub owner by night, rejected him for being weak, kicked him out of the house when he was just a teenager. Imagine being 15, broke, homeless, and carrying the burden of feeling like God, your family, and the world were against you. But Richard had one weapon: his music. And when fame finally came, with it came a strange kind of freedom and an even stranger kind of cage. On stage, he could be flamboyant, wear makeup, scream sexually suggestive lyrics, and the world would applaud him. But as soon as the music stopped, the mask would be put back on. Being queer-coded was one thing. Being openly gay in the 1950s music industry, that was career suicide. There were moments, rare and fleeting, when he would speak his truth. In candid interviews, he would laugh about his wild days with men, about the orgies and the nightlife, about sneaking around with lovers his fans would never know about. But then, almost like clockwork, the shame would set in. He would continue his religious tirades, openly condemn homosexuality, call it unnatural, and claim to be saved all over again. This back and forth not only confused fans, it was emotionally devastating for Richard himself. He went through periods of self-loathing, throwing away personal belongings that reminded him of past relationships, dropping friends, cutting ties with people who loved him for who he was. All because, deep down, he believed that God would never forgive him for being gay. But the world kept watching, keeping buying records, keeping cheering for the wild man of rock and roll, never knowing the full price he was paying inside. By the time the LGBTQ+ movement gained real momentum, Little Richard was older, tired, and still unwilling or unable to fully embrace the label that had defined him in his private life for so long. When he died in 2020, tributes poured in from around the world. Musicians, fans, and even LGBTQ+ activists celebrated him as a queer icon. But the saddest truth? Richard never got to live his full, authentic self in public. Not even in the final chapters of his life. And here's the frustrating part. If someone as powerful, influential, groundbreaking as Little Richard felt unable to come out, how many others are still hiding to this day? Let us know what you think in the comments below. When we talk about voices that shook American society, James Baldwin stands in a class of his own. A literary genius, a fearless civil rights advocate, and a man whose words still resonate in classrooms, protests, and political speeches today. But behind his sharp intellect and fearless commentary on race and injustice, Baldwin carried a personal pain: his struggles as a black gay man in America. Born in Harlem in 1924, Baldwin grew up under the strict supervision of a devoutly religious stepfather, a preacher who believed that fear and discipline were the tools to keep a boy on the right path. But even as a child, Baldwin knew he didn't fit that mold. His love of literature, his sensitivity and his attraction to other boys set him apart from an early age. The church was both a refuge and a prison. By his teenage years, he knew that who he was would never be accepted within those walls or outside on the streets of 1940s America, where being black and gay was a double sentence. So Baldwin left. In the late 1940s, he flew to Paris in pursuit of freedom and breathing room. For the first time, he found a place where he could exist more openly, at least than he had at home. But the thing is, even in Paris, Baldwin rarely labeled himself. He wrote about homosexual desire, male love, isolation, and longing with revolutionary honesty. His 1956 novel, Giovanni's Room, is now a classic of gay literature. But back then, it almost cost him his career. Publishers warned him. Writing about homosexual love would alienate black readers and everyone else. But Baldwin, never one to follow the rules, published it anyway. And while critics praised the book, it also fueled speculation about his personal life. That's where things got complicated. Baldwin never stood on a podium and shouted, "I'm gay." No interviews, no public essays asserting that label. Instead, he let his characters speak for him. Their pain, their longing, their anger became his silent confession. And at a time when coming out could ruin your career, or worse, it was an act of defiance. His friends and writing colleagues knew, his lovers knew, his colleagues in Paris and New York knew. But to the public, Baldwin remained a brilliant, enigmatic writer who spoke about race but remained silent about the details of his heart. Even near the end, as the LGBTQ+ movement grew, Baldwin eschewed labels. He once said, "I've always believed that labels are dangerous. I'd rather not be called anything at all." But for many black LGBTQ+ artists today, Baldwin is more than a literary icon. He is a symbol of survival. Proof that even when the world tries to erase you, your voice and legacy can still transcend. So what do you think? Was Baldwin's silence about his sexuality, fear, or quiet rebellion? Let us know in the comments, because this conversation still matters. When Luther Vandross sang about love, millions believed he was singing directly to them. With every lyric, every note, he captured longing, hope, heartbreak, and passion in a way few artists could. Hits like Never Too Much and Dance With My Father became timeless anthems, played at weddings, family gatherings, and lonely nights. But behind that soothing voice and those soulful love songs, Luther carried a secret heavier than any heartbreak he ever sang about: his sexuality. Born in New York City in 1951, Luther grew up surrounded by music, but also by expectations. In the R&B world of the 70s, 80s, and 90s, being a black male singer meant being masculine, sexy, and above all, heterosexual. Record labels marketed him as the dream man of millions of female fans. And Luther lived up to that. In interviews, he dodged every personal question about relationships, never confirming, never denying, just smiling, redirecting the conversation, and letting fans imagine whatever story they wanted. But how long could a person live like that, without falling apart inside? Behind the scenes, friends, colleagues, and industry insiders knew the truth. Luther was gay, and he lived with the constant fear that coming out would destroy the career he had worked so hard to build. One of his closest friends, singer Patti LaBelle, later revealed that Luther feared losing his female fan base. He was terrified that the women who clung to his every love song would leave him as soon as they learned the truth. And perhaps even more heartbreaking, he worried about what his mother would think. His family's acceptance weighed heavily on him, perhaps even more than the public. Bruce Vilanch, a writer and friend of Hollywood, once recalled Luther describing his double life. In public, he was the epitome of love songs. In private, he carried the pain of isolation, secrets, and self-denial. Do you think, in a different era, with a different industry, Luther would have found the courage to live openly? Luther never married, never had a public relationship with a woman, and never let his fans know his truth. Even as HIV and AIDS ravaged the black LGBTQ's community in the 80s and 90s, Luther remained silent, carefully navigating a world that refused to let black men, especially famous ones, live authentically. his health struggles only deepened the mystery. After a devastating stroke in 2003, Luther stopped making public appearances. And in 2005, the world lost one of the greatest voices in music history. It wasn't until after his death, friends and industry insiders, that the truth many suspected was quietly acknowledged. His voice told the world how to love. But in his own life, he sang those songs from behind a wall. A wall built by fear, by the pressures of the industry, and by a society that wasn't ready for men like him to live their lives to the fullest. And that's perhaps the most heartbreaking legacy of all. The man who gave millions the soundtrack to their love stories never got the chance to write his own. Richard Pryor was a man who made the world laugh at its ugliest realities. Addiction, racism, domestic violence, poverty, the things most people run from. Pryor ran straight for putting them on stage and daring America to look. He stripped comedy to its core, told stories that made people uncomfortable, and still made them laugh. But there was one subject, a dark corner of his life, that even Pryor couldn't wrap up in a joke: his sexuality. Born in 1940 in Peoria, Illinois, Richard grew up in chaos. His grandmother ran a brothel. His earliest memories? Violence, prostitution, addiction, and survival. As a teenager, he saw things most grown men never saw. And while other boys were learning how to date girls, Richard learned how to hide, how to distract, how to weaponize humor to hide the parts of himself that felt too dangerous to express. On stage, Pryor was fearless. He joked about everything, even his own near-death experiences, even the darkest corners of his drug use, even setting himself on fire in a freebase accident. But whenever the subject of sex and identity came up, he turned it into something else: a joke, a distraction, a joke designed to distract. In some of his stand-up routines, Pryor hinted at being with men. The comments were swift, the stories were told with a smirk and a wink, leaving the audience guessing, is he serious? Or is this just Richard being outrageous again? And maybe that was the goal, keeping it vague enough, so no one really knew. But here's the heartbreaking part. He was serious. In private, close friends knew the truth. In his diaries, Pryor wrote openly about his attraction to men, his experiences, his confusion, and his shame. For him, it wasn't about identity labels, it was about survival, and the overwhelming fear that if the public knew, it would all fall apart. And in 1980s America, for a black comedian at the height of his fame, those fears were not unfounded. Then came the revelation that no one saw coming. Years after Pryor's death, music mogul Quincy Jones accidentally dropped a bombshell in an interview, suggesting that Richard Pryor had a romantic and sexual relationship with none other than Marlon Brando. The media exploded. Fans were stunned. The internet was awash with headlines. But the one who confirmed it with quiet certainty was Pryor's widow, Jennifer Lee Pryor. She said Richard was not ashamed, not in private. He joked about it with friends, wrote about it in his diary. It was just something the rest of the world was never allowed to know. And perhaps that is the real tragedy here. For a man who built his entire career on radical honesty, who bared his soul night after night to millions of strangers, Richard Pryor still died with much of himself locked away. Can you imagine how exhausting that must be? Standing under bright lights, making the world laugh, while inside you're drowning in silence? Some say the reason Pryor pushed himself so hard, living so recklessly, burned so many bridges, it was because deep down he never believed he deserved peace, or love, or even forgiveness. And maybe that's why. When we watch his old comedy shows now and hear him joke about sex, those laughs, they sound a little different, a little sadder, like a man laughing just to keep from crying. When Johnny Mathis sang about love, it felt like love that transcended time, soft, innocent, and universal. For generations, couples have slow danced to his voice. Weddings, anniversaries, first dates. His songs have become the soundtrack to millions of love stories. But the truth, most of those fans never knew at the time. While Johnny Mathis was transmitting the language of love to the world, he was not allowed to speak publicly about his own love. Born in 1935 in Gilmer, Texas, and raised in San Francisco, Johnny was a natural performer from an early age. By the late 1950s, he was a household name. His ballads were topping the charts, his face was on magazine covers, and millions of women dreamed of being the one Johnny sang for. But who was Johnny really? He lived quietly, privately, and yes, as a gay man. In an era when even the rumor of homosexuality could end a career overnight, Johnny chose to remain silent, not out of shame, but out of self-preservation and perhaps out of wisdom. Have you ever wondered how many artists of that era made the same choice? Not because they wanted to hide, but because they wanted to survive? Mathis never staged dramatic denials. He never played the tabloid game. He simply refused to discuss his personal life. But in 1982, something changed. In an interview with Us magazine, Mathis casually, almost accidentally, admitted that he was gay. The industry, the media, they weren't ready. The article was buried, the world moved on, and Mathis went back to doing what he did best: singing, performing, and minding his own business. It wasn't until decades later, when conversations about LGBTQ+ became more open, fans and journalists came back, asking, why don't we talk about this more? Why isn't Johnny Mathis celebrated as one of the first black celebrities to come out? His answer was as gentle as his music. He says he never felt the need to make a big statement, that his sexuality was just a part of who he was, not a headline, not a scandal, not a marketing tool. And in a way, that quiet dignity became his rebellion. At a time when the world wanted drama, Johnny gave it grace. When others felt compelled to lie, he simply chose not to say anything. Today, looking back, Mathis is both a pioneer and a reminder. Coming out looks different to everyone. For some, it's a front-page story. For others, it's a gentle confession, wrapped in a melody. Only those who really listen will hear it. And maybe that's what Johnny Mathis is most about. Before Martin Luther King Jr. stood on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, before the words "I have a dream" were immortalized, Bayard Rustin was an activist. Bayard was more than an activist. He was the architect behind the entire 1963 March on Washington. Every bus route, every volunteer list, every speaker lineup, Bayard built it all, piece by piece, knowing he would never be the face of it. And why? Because Bayard Rustin was openly gay. At a time when being black was a battle for survival, being black and gay, it was a double whammy, a risk the movement was unwilling to take. Born in 1912 in Westchester, Pennsylvania, Bayard spent decades fighting for justice long before King became a household name. From the early labor movements to the anti-segregation protests, he was always on the front lines. But as his influence grew, so did the whispers. His 1953 arrest on morals charges after being caught with another man became a weapon for both the FBI and the political enemies of the civil rights movement. Leaders feared that Rustin's sexuality would be used to discredit everything they stood for. Even in King's inner circle, some pushed to sideline him. Some wanted him gone altogether. Can you imagine that choice? Pour your heart and soul into a freedom movement and then be told your love life is a burden? But Bayard didn't leave. Instead, he worked harder. He moved from the spotlight into the background, quietly directing, building, and strategizing. Without applause, without recognition, and without the recognition he deserved. There's a certain kind of pain that comes from being essential, yet invisible. Bayard carried that pain for years. Even after the success of the March on Washington, Bayard's name still didn't make headlines. History books barely mentioned him. TV interviews were rarely called. While others became icons, Bayard became a footnote. But even so, he never stopped fighting. For voting rights, for labor unions, for anti-war causes, and later in life, for LGBTQ+ equality. One of his last battles was for the rights of openly gay people, long before it was politically acceptable. It wasn't until 2013, 26 years after his death, Bayard Rustin finally received national recognition. President Obama awarded him the Presidential Medal of Freedom, calling him one of the greatest unsung heroes of the civil rights movement. Looking back, you have to ask yourself, How many Bayard Rustins are there in history? Men and women who fought for justice but had to hide, sacrifice, or step aside simply for the people they loved. Bayard believed in equality for all. He fought not just for his race, but for humanity, even when humanity wasn't ready to fight for him. His legacy, it's written between the lines of every speech, every march, and every right that we now take for granted. While most artists of the 1970s tried to fit in, Sylvester made his career by standing out. In an era of glitter balls and dance floors, he was more than just a disco voice. He was a statement, a challenge to convention, and for many, a living revolution in high heels. From the moment he stepped on stage, Sylvester James Jr. didn't just perform, he existed, loudly, unapologetically, and beautifully odd. Born in Los Angeles in 1947, Sylvester grew up singing in church choirs, a space where his powerful falsetto first attracted attention and where, ironically, he first learned that being himself came at a price. When he moved to San Francisco, he had no interest in fitting in anymore. The makeup, the sequins, the genderless fashion, everything about Sylvester exuded authenticity. And then, in the same breath, you could sense the loneliness beneath the glitter. When he sang "You Make Me Feel Mighty Real," it wasn't just a disco anthem, it was a statement. Quirky love, quirky existence, quirky joy deserves attention. But being openly gay and black in the music industry of the 1970s, it was dangerous territory. Radio stations refused to play his songs in certain markets. Promoters were hesitant to book him. Record labels didn't know how to package him. There were nights when Sylvester performed for thousands and still went home, wondering if mainstream America would ever truly embrace him. Can you imagine giving the world your voice, your truth, and still being told you're too much? But if there's one thing Sylvester never did, it was shut himself away from anyone. He used his fame to elevate the LGBTQ+ community, advocate for gay rights, perform at Pride events, and then, when the HIV AIDS crisis hit, become one of the first black celebrities to speak out. When Sylvester was diagnosed with HIV in the mid-80s, he knew what it meant. He'd seen his friends fall ill one by one. He knew how the media portrayed people like him, as cautionary tales, as the statistics show. But even then, Sylvester was still on stage, keeping singing, keeping loving, and still fighting. In the final months of his life, as his health was failing, he made one final request. Royals from his music should go directly to HIV/AIDS charities in San Francisco. Even in death, he wanted to leave something meaningful behind, something bigger than fame. Sylvester died in 1988 at just 41. But decades later, his voice still echoes across dance floors. His legacy lives on in every queer artist, every drag artist, every person who refuses to apologize for taking up space. And perhaps that's the question we should all be asking ourselves. How many lives did Sylvester save, just by existing, without remorse? Because sometimes, just being yourself is the loudest act of protest. If you've ever been captivated by the sound of a Duke Ellington classic, chances are you've been moved by the genius of Billy Strayhorn. His melodies, light yet complex, his harmonies, rich yet subtle. Strayhorn wasn't just a composer, he was the invisible architect behind some of jazz's most timeless works. Take the A Train. That was him. Lush Life. That was him too. But while his music echoed through clubs and concert halls, Billy Strayhorn himself remained behind. Not by accident, by survival. In the 1940s and 50s, being black in the music industry was a struggle enough. Being black and openly gay? That was career suicide. Unlike many of his peers, however, Strayhorn never tried to hide who he was. He didn't play the straight man. He didn't pretend to have relationships with women for photo ops. In his tight-knit circle, everyone knew. Billy loved men. And he made no apologies for it. But what's heartbreaking is how the industry treated him. Duke Ellington, though forever grateful for Strayhorn's brilliance, rarely acknowledged him publicly. Billy's name was often not on the record covers, his photos were rarely published. His interviews? Hardly. And part of that was the times they lived in. Jazz was already a racially charged space. Adding an openly gay black man to the spotlight, it was a risk few labels, or even Ellington himself, would take. But Strayhorn stayed, loyal, silent, pouring his heartache, his isolation, and yes, his secret love into his music. Have you ever listened to Lush Life late at night? The longing, the exhaustion, the pain of secret love. It's all there. Every note, every pause, every lyric, a coded confession for those who care to listen. Strayhorn's relationships were often private, fleeting, and lived in the shadows. But among friends, he was open. He brought his boyfriend to rehearsals, hold hands when he wanted to. In his own quiet way, Billy lived authentically, long before the world made room for men like him. Sadly, that world never really came into his life. Billy Strayhorn died in 1967 at just 51 of esophageal cancer. At his funeral, Duke Ellington finally said it out loud, calling him my right hand, my left hand, the eyes in my head, the brain of my heart. It was a beautiful tribute, but for many LGBTQ+ fans, it also felt too little, too late. Today, Strayhorn's legacy is being restored. His songs are being studied, celebrated, and finally his truth is being told. Because behind every iconic tune is a man, loving, longing, and living in a world that never saw him fully. To most Americans, Paul Winfield was the epitome of strength. A leading black actor in Hollywood who, let's be honest, didn't have many leading roles for men who looked like him. His performance in Sounder earned him an Academy Award nomination. His portrayal of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in the King miniseries captivated audiences. On screen, Paul was everything the industry wanted him to be: classy, masculine, and above all, marketable. But behind the camera, aside from awards shows and red carpets, Paul Winfield lived a very different story. A story he never dared to share with the public. In 1970s and 1980s Hollywood, being an openly gay black man wasn't just risky, it was career-ending. Studios expected their male stars to exude heterosexual charm, to flirt in interviews, to show up at events with hand-picked female co-stars on their arms. Paul played along. At one point, he even publicly dated his Sounder co-star Cicely Tyson, a move that many later saw as damage control. But the truth was, Paul's heart was elsewhere. For more than 30 years, he was in a serious relationship with Charles Gillen Jr., an architect, a man who was not very well known in Hollywood. Their love was real, steady, quiet, and like so many other same-sex relationships of the era, it was done behind closed doors, out of fear, but never out of lack of love. Paul's close friends knew it. Industry insiders whispered it. But to the public, he was just another eligible bachelor, another Hollywood heartthrob who hadn't found the right woman. Have you ever wondered how exhausting it must have been? To build an entire career, to stand on stage and accept an award, knowing that the person who mattered most couldn't stand next to you in the spotlight. In 2002, when Charles died of cancer, those who knew Paul say he was never the same again. The man who had always held on to his public image began to withdraw. His health rapidly declined. Just 2 years later, in 2004, Paul Winfield died of a heart attack. And it wasn't until after both of their deaths that the full truth about their relationship became known to the public. There was no scandal, there was no exposure, just quiet acknowledgement from friends, and the bitter realization that Hollywood had lost not just a leading man, but a man. Like so many others who had spent his life loving in silence. Today, when we look back at Paul's career and the roles that made his name, there's something poetic and heartbreaking in knowing that the strength he displayed on screen was often a mask, hiding the vulnerability he lived with every day. And now, we come to the last name on our list. A man known to millions as the loud, bold, fast-talking George Jefferson, but almost no one knows the real Sherman Hemsley. For more than a decade, Sherman Hemsley lit up American living rooms as the star of the Jeffersons. He played a self-made businessman, a proud, sharp-tongued black man who wasn't afraid to speak his mind. In real life, fans assumed he was just as bold, confident, outspoken. But the truth? It couldn't be further from the truth. In real life, Sherman was incredibly shy, soft-spoken, very reserved. While his character told jokes and made headlines, Sherman himself quietly retreated from the spotlight, doing everything he could to keep one part of his life private, his sexuality. Unlike many of his Hollywood peers, Sherman never gave interviews about his dating life, never brought a partner to public events, never even reported on romantic relationships. For years, the tabloids had little to no information about, because Sherman kept his private life more private than most. Some close friends say he never even discussed it behind closed doors, not out of shame, but out of fear, fearing that coming out as gay would ruin the career he had built. And worse, erase the groundbreaking image of George Jefferson, one of the first successful and powerful black characters on American television. Throughout the 70s and 80s, being black and famous was subject to endless scrutiny. Being black, famous, and gay? That seemed like a risk Sherman couldn't take. So he remained single in public, lived alone, rarely attended industry parties, and while fans laughed at his on-screen ostentation, few realized that the man behind the character commuted home every night to silence. After the Jeffersons ended, Sherman continued to act, taking smaller roles, but never stepped into the spotlight that required interviews about his personal life. Even as rumors circulated for decades, Sherman never confirmed, never denied. Just smiled, gave brief answers, and changed the subject. It wasn't until 2012 when Sherman Hemsley died of lung cancer, the truth, which many insiders had known for years, quietly emerged. Actor Garrett Morris, his longtime friend and colleague, publicly confirmed that Sherman was gay, but chose, until the very last minute, to keep that part of himself away from the cameras, away from fans, and in many ways, away from himself. Reflecting on Sherman's story, it's hard not to wonder, how would his life have been different if he had felt safe enough to live fully? With every laugh, with every catchphrase, with every iconic TV moment, there was a man sitting quietly at home, living with a secret the world wasn't ready to hear. And perhaps that's the hardest truth of all. Sometimes the people who make us laugh the hardest are the ones who carry the heaviest silence. And that's our list. 10 black men who shaped music, comedy, movies, and history, but spent their lives hiding a simple truth. Some, like Sylvester and Bayard Rustin, lived boldly. Others, like Luther Vandross and Paul Winfield, stayed silent to survive. And some, like Little Richard and Richard Pryor, walked the painful line between insinuation and concealment. Their stories remind us of how far we've come, and how far we still have to go. Which story has stayed with you the most? Leave your thoughts below, like, subscribe, and join us next time for more untold stories that matter. Thanks for watching. What if Hollywood's hottest guys were also the bravest? In an image-obsessed industry, these 10 young stars aren't just famous, they're rewriting the rules. Handsome, talented, and proudly gay. From handsome teenage boys to groundbreaking icons, each of them is breaking the mold and saying, "This is me." And trust us, some of these names are sure to surprise you. Ready to see which stars are redefining what it means to be a leading man in Hollywood? Let's get started. Frey Gutierrez. In Hollywood, looks can open doors, but the truth knocks them down. And that's exactly what Frey Gutierrez did. At first glance, Frey is just another teenage dream. A jawline sharp enough to cut glasses, eyes that want to cause trouble, and a quiet charisma that makes casting directors take notice. He's young, charismatic, and has the kind of face that makes fan edits go viral on Tumblr. But for years, Frey has harbored something deeper, a truth he hasn't been ready to share. He got his start in the industry playing Nolan on Teen Wolf, a series known for its mix of supernatural elements and teenage angst. Even then, Frey stood out, not just because of his looks, but because of the way he could go from brooding to vulnerable in a single glance. Then, in Cruel Summer, he took on the role of Jamie Henson, adding layers of complexity to a coming-of-age mystery that captivated Gen Z audiences across America. As his fame grew, so did the questions. Was he dating anyone? Why did he avoid red carpets with his escorts? Why didn't he answer certain questions in interviews? But Frey remained quiet. Not cold, just careful. And who could blame him? For many gay actors, coming out so early can feel like career suicide in an industry that still whispers behind closed doors. But then came June 25, 2023, Pride season, New York City, the Gitano Island party. Amidst the music and summer air, a camera flash captured it all. Frey Gutierrez kissing co-star Zane Phillips. No spectacle, no PR stunt, just two men, in a moment that was honest, real, and quietly revolutionary. That kiss? It wasn't a scandal. It wasn't even a surprise to many fans. But it was confirmation. Quiet, clear, and powerful. And just like that, the speculation stopped. So let's pause for a moment. If you were in his shoes, young, famous, and constantly scrutinized, would you have the courage to do what he did? To let the world see you in your entirety? Leave your answer in the comments. Because here's the thing. Frey doesn't owe us anything. He doesn't need to be public. He can play the PR game, smile for the cameras, and live a quiet private life. But instead, he chose honesty. And in a world where image is currency, that choice is radical. Frey hasn't stopped working since that moment, but he's changed. He's become more intentional, more expressive, more open. His social media is subtle but authentic. No rainbow flags everywhere. No slogans. Just glimpses of a young man living more freely. He hasn't yet taken on openly queer roles, but he doesn't have to hide behind straight-coded characters now either. And that freedom? It's evident in the way he holds himself, in the way he speaks, in the way fans connect with him, not as an ideal, but as a person. He may not be the loudest voice in LGBTQ+ Hollywood, but sometimes quiet courage resonates louder. And Frey Gutierrez, with one photo, one moment, one choice, proved that the most powerful way to come out is to live your truth. So what do you think? Does Frey's approach, subtle, gentle, yet unwavering, resonate with you more than a viral headline? Let us know below. And stay tuned, because the next star we're about to meet was thrust into the spotlight at just 18 and still had the strength to say it, "I'm bisexual." So what? So while Frey Gutierrez came out with a kiss, softly, quietly, and completely of his own accord, Kit Connor's truth came as a storm. At just 18, Kit is more than just an actor on the rise. He's the heart of Netflix's Heartstopper, a groundbreaking, tender, gay teen romance that took the world by surprise. In the film, Kit plays Nick Nelson, a teenage football player struggling with the tender turmoil of discovering he's bisexual. He does it with such warmth, such grace, and so much humanity that fans around the world can't stop watching. And then, they can't stop speculating. Is Kit actually bisexual in real life? Is he just acting? Does he owe them answers? The questions kept coming, from fans, the press, tweets, YouTubers, even articles in major publications. It was no longer curiosity. It started to become pressure. He had just turned 19 and was already being dissected as an icon. Then came October 31st, 2022. A tweet. Straight, unedited, and disappointing. "I am bisexual. Congratulations on forcing an 18-year-old to come out. I think some of you missed the point of the show." No rainbow graphics, no grand declarations, just pain, typed out at 2 a.m. and sent into the noise. It hit hard, because here's a young man playing one of the most tender gay characters we've seen in years, and in real life, he hasn't been given the space to figure it out quietly. Since then, Kit hasn't relied on fame. He's relied on work. He returned to Heartstopper Season 2 with more power behind his eyes. He's become more intentional with interviews, keeping things close to his chest. On the red carpet, his fashion has become bolder, more fearless. He's not trying to be a gay icon, but just being himself, imperfect, protected, evolving, has become one. Beyond acting, Kit has entered the fashion world with quiet confidence. He's worked with Louis Vuitton, walked for Loa, and appeared in editorials that combine masculinity with softness in fresh, unscripted ways. Behind the scenes, he's focused on voiceover work, stand-up writing, and music, a longtime passion he's only recently begun to explore. He's taken a step back from the constant press to work on himself, choosing privacy over visibility, not to hide, but to stand his ground. He's also spoken out in small, sure ways about the damage online pressure can do to young gay people, especially those still figuring themselves out. He doesn't speak at rallies or lead pride campaigns, He lets his choices, in scripts, in silence, in style, speak for him. And that's perhaps the most relatable thing about him. He's not the loudest guy in the room. He doesn't post hashtags. He's just a young man, living his life on his own terms. And after everything he's been through, that's enough. Next, we meet someone who isn't quiet. He's bold, unafraid, and challenges every old notion of what a leading man should look like and love. Zane Phillips. If Kit Connor's story is about pressure, Zane Phillips is the kind of man who puts pressure on the world. He walks into a room like it belongs to him. Square jaw, tall frame, shoulders that look like they're carved from marble. If you've seen him in Fire Island, glamorous, or even shirtless selfies on Instagram, you know that already. But here's what you might not know. Zane doesn't just come out. He comes out. There's no loud announcement of coming out. There's no moment of silence followed by a rainbow wave. Zane just lives openly from day one. There's no label plastered across his chest. There's no explanation. And that in Hollywood today is still extreme. Because for years, gay male actors have been told to tone it down, to hide their partners, to up their roles, to keep their queerness off camera. Zane, he's turned that stereotype into dust. In Fire Island, he plays the handsome, aloof romantic lead, the kind of role usually reserved for straight actors pretending to be charming. Except this time, the charm is real and the sexuality too. He's not just playing the part, he's reclaiming it. And not just on screen. Off-screen, he makes no attempt to hide his life. The dates, the workouts, the lavish nights out in New York's gay scene. Some say, don't let your sexuality define you. Zane seems to reply, why not? Because what's wrong with being proudly gay and brutally attractive? What's wrong with embracing the beauty of your body, your identity, and your desires without apologizing? He showed us that gay men don't have to shrink to be taken seriously. They can show skin and show depth. They can flirt and still lead. They can look like a Marvel superhero and still be themselves. But let's be clear, Zane is more than just his body and his confidence. He's trained in theater, sharp in interviews, passionate about telling queer stories, not as an agenda, but as a way of seeing the world. And in June 20th, 23, when a photo of him kissing actor Frey Gutierrez at the Gitano Island Pride Party broke the internet, he didn't post a caption. He didn't make a statement. He just smiled and let the moment speak for itself. Because when you love this confidently, the world can take all the pictures it wants. You've lived your life to the fullest. Today, Zane is quickly becoming a modern gay sex symbol. Not the shallow kind, but the kind that makes people think, wait, why hasn't Hollywood ever made gay men this attractive before? And maybe that's the point. Zane doesn't wait to be invited into leading man territory. He walks in shirtless, smiling, and rewriting the rules as he goes. What about you? When you see someone like Zane Phillips, unapologetic, raw, unfiltered, do you feel challenged? Or do you feel seen? Either way, he doesn't ask for permission. We've met the quiet ones, the shy surprises, and the soft, slow coming outs. But next comes a story wrapped in paparazzi flashes, surprise romance, and a wedding that broke the internet. You won't see this one coming. Lukas Gage. He didn't post a fancy Instagram caption or a quiet interview, tissues in hand. Lukas Gage emerged as a true Hollywood disruptor in a blur of designer sunglasses, unexpected romances, and a Vegas wedding officiated by Kim Kardashian. Long before the flash and headlines, Lukas was just a kid from San Diego with big dreams and no shortcuts. He bombed auditions, sent in dozens of self-taped tapes, worked service jobs to make ends meet. He wasn't handed anything, he worked his way up. And when fame finally came knocking, it didn't knock politely. That all changed over a Zoom call. A casting director, unaware that his microphone was hot, insulted Lukas's apartment during a remote audition. "These poor people live in these tiny apartments," the voiceover said. Lukas posted the clip himself, not out of revenge, but out of truth. The moment didn't just make him famous, it showed what made Lukas different. He wasn't afraid to be seen, no matter what his flaws. Then came Euphoria, The White Lotus, You, roles that pushed boundaries, including sex and chaos. He played glamorous, dangerous, unfiltered characters. And while fans began speculating about his private life, Lukas kept quiet until he didn't. In early 2023, he began appearing alongside Chris Appleton, the celebrity hairstylist behind Kim Kardashian's iconic looks. They were photographed on vacation, then kissing, then walking the red carpet hand in hand. And just when everyone thought it was a whirlwind romance, boom, a Vegas wedding. Kim officiated. It was pure pop culture drama, but somehow tender. "I was so in love," Lukas said in a brief interview. And that was it. He didn't label himself. He didn't write a manifesto. He just let love speak, loudly, joyfully, and unapologetically. But the story didn't end there. Just a few months later, the couple quietly divorced. No scandal, no mess. Lukas came out, did press, kept working, and proved once again that his story wasn't just about coming out. It was about staying true, even when the cameras stopped flashing. Today, Lukas continues to choose bold, nonconformist roles, often playing gay men, but never stereotypical ones. He challenged Hollywood's obsession with masculinity, criticized unrealistic body standards, and appeared on red carpets in sheer gowns and pearls, carefree and radiant. He also used his platform to lift up other queer voices, share space with independent creators, and build a career on his own terms. There's no perfect story here, just a man living fully, fiercely, and wonderfully on his own terms. And maybe that's what queerness looks like now, not just a revelation, but a reinvention. Not just a label, but a lifestyle built on freedom. Now we turn to you. Do you think love speaks louder when it's whispered or when it comes in pearls and tuxedos at a Vegas altar? Justice Smith. Justice Smith has never really had a chance to fit in life. Not in Hollywood, even when he tried. As a young, black, gay actor breaking into an industry that rarely makes space for all three, Justice is used to walking into rooms and knowing right away, this script is not for me. But he shows up anyway. You might have first noticed him in Jurassic World: Fallen Kingdom, fast-talking, tech-savvy sidekick energy. Or maybe in Detective Pikachu, where he held his own alongside CGI creatures and Ryan Reynolds' voice. He's charming, safe, marketable. But that's not the whole story. Behind the scenes, Justice is struggling, not with his talent, but with the unwritten rules. Don't talk about being gay. Don't be too soft. Don't be too political. He followed the script until he didn't. In June 2020, at the height of the Black Lives Matter protests, Justice decided that staying silent was no longer an option. In a series of posts, he not only spoke out in support of Black trans lives, but also publicly acknowledged that he was gay. As a gay Black man, I've been disappointed to see some people eager to say Black Lives Matter, but silent when trans queer is added to the mix, he wrote. No PR team. No rainbow campaign, just the truth, the kind of truth that cuts to the heart. Since that moment, Justice has been one of the few young actors who stands firmly in the middle. Masculine yet gentle, outspoken yet measured, visible yet real. He stars in HBO Max's Generation, a raw, chaotic teen drama that refuses to gloss over its queer side. His performance is sublime, sarcastic, impulsive, deeply insecure, and deeply human. Off-screen, he's spoken openly about mental health, queer erasure, and the loneliness of not seeing yourself on screen. He doesn't speak for a movement, he speaks for himself, and somehow that makes people feel seen. These days, Justice does things differently. He chooses roles that challenge, not flatter. He collaborates with queer writers, queer artists, queer stories. And the fashion? Don't get us started. He's walked the carpet in fishnets, velvet jackets, sequined trousers, not to provoke, but to show, to embody a kind of freedom that says, I am more than what you see. Not everyone gets that, but he's not doing it for everyone. Justice Smith isn't trying to fit into the Hollywood mold. He's shattering it and building something better from the pieces. So here's a thought. What if more actors like him stopped asking for permission to be authentic? Maybe we'd finally stop talking about diversity as if it were a gift, and start talking about authenticity as if it were a right. Next up, a performer who has never needed attention to shine, because his heart, his joy, and his voice have made him stand out in every room he's walked into. Frankie A. Rodriguez, not every coming out story has to be dramatic. Some just feel right, like they've always been there. That's the energy Frankie A. Rodriguez brings to the screen and to his life. If you've seen High School Musical, the series, you know exactly who he is. He plays Carlos, a sharp, bold, unapologetically cool student choreographer with a heart of gold and a wardrobe full of sparkle. But here's what's Frankie apart from most young gay actors. He didn't wait to come out. He began his acting career being open about who he was. No nervousness, no build-up, just truth, poured into every role, every audition, every red carpet. And that's rare, especially in the world of Disney, where family-friendly often means don't ask, don't tell. But Frankie changed that, forever. When he stepped onto the Disney Plus stage as the network's first openly gay main character, he wasn't just playing a role, he was making history. But he didn't act like it. He wasn't on a mission. He wasn't trying to be a pioneer. He just showed up as himself. And somehow, that made the impact all the more profound. Kids watched Carlos flirt, fall in love, dance at prom, and it wasn't a special. It was just part of the story. For thousands of queer teens, especially Latinx kids who had never seen themselves represented like that, it meant a lot. Frankie never made his identity a headline, but he never hid it either. He used visibility as a tool, not to preach, but to normalize. And that kind of subtle, steady display, it stuck with people. Since then, Frankie has focused on lighthearted storytelling. He leans into comedy, music, youth culture. His interviews are always upbeat, his energy a magnet. But he's also thoughtful, especially when it comes to the pressure of being first. Because with fame comes responsibility. And sometimes that responsibility can feel overwhelming. But Frankie handles it the way he handles everything. With kindness, with humor, with a wink and a dance move. Today, he continues to appear in Disney Plus content and LGBTQ plus youth groups, all the while maintaining a gentle drama. No scandals, no dramatic shifts, just a steady, inspiring presence. In a world obsessed with loud declarations, Frankie's gentle confidence reminds us that being openly present is, in and of itself, a radical act, especially when you're the first to do it in front of millions of kids. So maybe the question isn't, who's the boldest? Maybe it's who's making the next generation feel seen without having to shout? Next up, a wild kid with a voice that can't be ignored. A boy who's young, unpredictable, and has come out as bisexual directly on Instagram. Jack Dylan Grazer. Jack Dylan Grazer didn't come out in a magazine interview. He didn't write a heartfelt Instagram post or release a YouTube video. He just said it. Mid-sentence, mid-laugh, mid-live. I'm bisexual. You idiot. That's it. One of the most talked about young actors in Hollywood casually came out as bisexual to hundreds of fans watching live, and then continued telling the joke. There was no preparation, no branding, no moment. Just Jack. And honestly, that's exactly who he's always been. If you've seen It or Shazam, you know Jack doesn't play quiet characters. He's loud, expressive, funny, and just a little chaotic in the best way. Off-screen, he's no different. Jack has always existed outside the box. His style, gender-fluid and unpredictable. His humor, dry, absurd, and deeply Gen Z. His interviews, unfiltered, refreshingly honest and messy. So when he said I'm bisexual during a live stream in July 20th, 21, it didn't feel like a revelation, it felt like a shrug. A smile, a wink to an audience that had always seen him as something more than straight. And maybe that was the point. For Jack, coming out wasn't a destination. It was just another stop on the wild, colorful, fast-moving ride that is being yourself. In the months since that live stream, Jack's fan base has exploded, not just because he came out, but because he was free. He doesn't try to clean up his image or position himself as a role model. He just continues to be loud, weird, and utterly unapologetic. He wears crop tops to events. He plays with pronouns. He teases audiences with his genderless looks. One day, he's wearing a leather jacket and boots. The next day, he's wearing a sparkly tank top and eyeliner. It's not a performance. It's not a strategy. It's an instinct. Jack doesn't try to be weird, he just is. And that's refreshing in itself. In an industry that still favors polished, predictable young stars, Jack's refusal to play by the rules makes him stand out. He turns chaos into charm. Today, he continues to take on roles that allow him to explore emotion and edginess. He's been open about mental health, identity, and queerness while growing up in the spotlight. He's not afraid to be vulnerable, or loud, or both. And while some may want him to tone it down, Jack's fans know that's exactly why they love him. He's reminding a generation that queerness doesn't have to come with pain. Sometimes it comes with laughter, with weird fashion choices, with live streams, chaos, and honesty in its purest form. And isn't that a source of pride in its own right? Next up, a young actor who started out in politics, made history on the Disney Channel, and proved to the world that being bisexual doesn't mean being confused. It means being whole. Joshua Rush. Most young actors chase fame. Joshua Rush chases purpose. At 16, he made Disney Channel history as Cyrus Goodman on Andy Mack, the first openly gay character on the network to actually say the words, "I'm gay." That moment changed everything. For Disney, for viewers, for Joshua himself. Because let's be honest, Disney Channel isn't exactly known for its gay representation. But here came Andy Mack, a coming-of-age show that dared to tell the truth. And at the center of it all was Joshua, playing a character many kids had never seen before, but desperately needed to see. Cyrus wasn't flamboyant or coded, he wasn't tragic or tokenized, he was just a kid. Confused, anxious, brave. And when he looked his best friend straight in the eye and said, "I'm gay," the silence that followed was louder than any applause. It was one of the most quietly revolutionary moments in children's television. And here's the part most people don't know. Joshua was figuring it out for himself at the same time. A few years later, in 2019, he came out as bisexual, making him not only the actor behind Disney's first gay character, but also the first Disney Channel star to come out in real life. His coming out wasn't headline-grabbing, it was thoughtful, it had layers, it was him. Since then, Joshua has taken a path few child stars have taken. He's leaning into politics, not Hollywood politics, real politics. He worked as a communications intern for a United States congressman. He campaigned for progressive candidates. He spoke openly about Gen Z, mental health, LGBTQ+ youth suicide rates, voting rights. He didn't just play a thoughtful character. He became one. His Instagram went from red carpet photos to infographics. His TikTok, political explainers with a dash of self-aware humor. And yet, all the while, he never strayed from his identity. He's proud to be bisexual, proud to be Jewish, proud to be loud when he needed it most. He's used all his fame not to seek validation, but to create space. These days, Joshua isn't always on screen. He's in school, studying political communications. He's writing, think, organize. And somehow, that seems true. Some stars lead with performance. Joshua Rush leads with principle. And while his Disney days of stardom may be behind him, his role as a quiet force for change is just beginning. Not all heroes make big speeches. Some just show up, full, open, and smart, and remind the world that fame is just the first step. Next up, a boy with a soft voice, a gentle smile, and the quiet power to melt millions of hearts. His role in Heartstopper made him famous, but his truth is what makes him unforgettable. Joe Locke. Some actors play characters. Joe Locke became him. Before Heartstopper, Joe was just a quiet teenager from the Isle of Man, a small island between England and Ireland, better known for its sheep than its fame. He wasn't raised in the spotlight. He didn't have an agent when he was 10. He just acted. In school plays, on small stages, and most of all, in his heart. So when Netflix held open auditions for Heartstopper, he sent in a self-tape. No expectations, no promises, just hope. And then, the unthinkable happened. He was cast as Charlie Spring, a soft-spoken, openly gay high schooler exploring the messy, tender, terrifying beauty of first love. And something incredible happened on screen. Joe wasn't playing Charlie. He was Charlie. Every glance, every gasp, every breakdown felt real, because it was. Charlie wasn't just a character. He was Joe. And for gay kids around the world who had never seen themselves portrayed with so much respect, care, and joy, it was life-changing. Suddenly, Joe Locke was everywhere. Teen Vogue covers, fashion editorials, talk shows, millions of fans. But fame didn't change his voice, it just gave him a microphone. Joe spoke openly about growing up gay in a small town, about isolation, about the subtle cruelty of always feeling like the other. He didn't make a dramatic coming-out speech, because he never needed one. Joe has always been real, quietly, strongly. He's talked about how Heartstopper isn't just a job, it's healing, for him, for viewers, for a generation of kids who finally saw that queer stories don't have to end in tragedy. And when asked if he feels pressure to be a role model, Joe gave the most Charlie-like answer you could imagine. "I just try to be honest, and kind, and hopefully that's enough." Yes, more than enough actually. Since Heartstopper, Joe has entered new worlds. He starred in Marvel's Agatha: Coven of Chaos, bringing his warmth and vulnerability to the supernatural universe. He's become a quiet force in British fashion, strutting the red carpet in fluid, expressive silhouettes. And all the while, he kept his cool. No scandals, no attention-grabbing headlines, just steady authenticity. Joe isn't flashy, he's not loud, but in a world obsessed with volume, his gentleness has become a radical act. He reminds us that love doesn't always have to be loud. That being gay doesn't mean being flamboyant or performative or even particularly brave. Sometimes it just means being present. Completely. Quietly. Completely. So if you've ever wondered what bravery looks like in 2025, it might not be on stage or at a protest. It might just be a boy from a quiet island holding someone's hand and not letting go. From Disney darlings to Netflix icons, each of these young stars has shaped a new coming-out story. But what happens when the world thinks it knows who you are, and then you blurt out a truth so simple, so ordinary, it silences millions? Meet the final name on our list. Noah Schnapp. By now the world knows him. Will Byers, the quiet kid in Stranger Things, the sensitive soul, the one who always seemed different. Millions of people have watched Noah Schnapp grow up on screen. From the fragile, trembling boy in The Upside Down, to a teenager navigating raw, unspoken emotions that resonate more deeply than monsters. And somewhere along the way, something changed. Viewers weren't just watching a character anymore. They were watching a mirror. Will's quiet yearning, his stolen glances, his desperate need to be seen, touched the hearts of gay teens around the world. For many, Will Byers wasn't just gay. He was them. And with each new season, the question grows louder. Is Noah playing a role or living the role? Rumors swirled, fans speculated, theories flew. But Noah said nothing. Not because he was hiding, because he wasn't ready. And then, in January 2023, without warning, he smiled on TikTok and wrote just 7 words. "I guess I'm more Will." That was it. A chuckle, a shrug, a truth so ordinary it shattered expectations. In a world that often demands trauma to prove itself, Noah chose joy. In a culture that expects confessions and crises, he winked. Not just brave, but revolutionary. And just like that, Noah Schnapp came out as gay, and the internet exploded. Not with outrage, celebration. Because Noah did what millions of people dream of. He owned his truth, on his own terms. No clickbait, no drama, no apologies, just a teenage boy saying, "Hey, this is me." In later interviews, Noah explained that his close friends and family knew long before the post and had shown him nothing but love. The TikTok wasn't a revelation. It was a punctuation mark, a quiet end to a private journey and the beginning of a much freer one. And since then, he hasn't changed, at least not in the way anyone expected. Noah is still the charming, quick-witted guy his fans love. But there's something different about his smile now, a relief, a quiet pride, a calmness that comes from finally being seen. He's returned to the set of Stranger Things for its final season, diving deeper into the entrepreneurial waters of his sustainable snack brand and continuing to show the world that being young and queer doesn't have to mean opening up to others. It can mean laughing. It can mean building. It can mean growing, with love and without fear. Noah's coming out wasn't a spectacle. it was a reminder. Not every queer story needs to be dramatic to be powerful. Sometimes the quietest truths resonate the most, and maybe, just maybe, the future of LGBTQ+ representation looks exactly like this. Not a scream, not a storm, but a smile. And the words, "I'm okay, I am me, and I'm here." 10 young stars. 10 different ways to say, "This is me." In a world that still requires queer people to explain, justify, wait, they chose to shine. Not louder, just more authentically. So what stories moved you? What moments made you feel seen? Let us know in the comments. We're listening, and if you believe that truth never needs a stage, then stay with us. Subscribe, share, and most of all, be proud. Some stars change the world with just a speech. What about others? They do it without a word. In this video, we explore 10 inspiring journeys, stories of young artists who didn't need a label to make a difference. Through quiet courage, powerful companionship, and bold sincerity, they helped open doors and hearts. Each of their stories shines. Let's get started. We begin our journey with a man with a sharp mind, a soft heart, and a quiet courage who doesn't need to shout to be heard. Sebastian Croft is a multi-talented man, actor, artist, storyteller. But above all, he's a reminder that authenticity is still the boldest thing you can wear in Hollywood. At just 22 years old, he's done what many can only dream of, performing Shakespeare on stage, becoming a Netflix heartthrob via Heartstopper, and landing on GQ's radar as a style icon. But what sets him apart is Sebastian never traded himself for fame. He didn't hide. He didn't edit. He didn't wait for approval. From the start, Sebastian made it clear. Being gay wasn't a press statement. It was part of who he was. He didn't need a dramatic reveal. Instead, he opted for the quiet truth. And somehow, that made it all the more clear. Have you ever met someone who made you feel braver just by being themselves? That's the presence Sebastian brings. During a panel at Variety's Young Hollywood event, he calmly but directly said, "Being gay is not a limitation." It wasn't just a statement, it was a message to all the young actors who are on the outside, wondering if coming out means being marginalized. With that one sentence, he opened the door. But he didn't stop with words. Sebastian has been showing up, literally and repeatedly, for the LGBTQ+ community. At Pride events, he's not in the VIP area, he's on the streets, alongside fans, friends, and even protesters, dancing with joy, responding to hate with light. Where many celebrities are in front of the camera, Sebastian is there for the cause. He's co-created campaigns that are not only beautiful but effective. T-shirts selling out about visibility, love, and history, with proceeds going to organizations that actually help LGBTQ+ people in crisis. That's the thing about Sebastian. He's not about showmanship. He's about impact. Even in the world of fashion, where looks can be down to the smallest detail, Sebastian makes every red carpet a statement. A worn leather jacket, a pin that affirms LGBT identity, a style that says, "This is me, and I'm not dressing for your comfort." Honestly, how many young actors in Hollywood are willing to risk being too obvious, too political, too out there? Most are silent, but Sebastian is taking the initiative. Off camera, he's still making a difference. Through his studio partnerships, he's helping to build a casting process that doesn't formalize queerness, but celebrates it. He's mentoring new talent, collaborating with other young creatives, and speaking out in subtle but undeniable ways. Not to promote his own brand, but to make the space safer for others. Even his social media has a similar energy. Not to be perfect, but to fill it with little windows into his authentic life. Photos with fans, vulnerable moments, behind-the-scenes fun. There's no barrier between who he is and how he presents himself. And that authenticity, that's what gets people's attention. So let me ask you, have you ever felt like other people's egos have given way to your own? Because that's what Sebastian Croft does. No preaching, no pushing, just being. He's not trying to lead a movement, but somehow, he is a movement. And if this is how he looks at 22, can you imagine the waves he'll make at 30? Next on our list is a young man who's quietly shaping the future of Hollywood. Not through scandal or headlines, but through sheer will. At just 21 years old, Aiden Gallagher is more than just an actor. He's a movement, a mindset, a mirror of what Gen Z leadership truly looks like. You may know him as the timeless, gifted number 5 on the Umbrella Academy. But behind the scenes, Aiden is forging a very different legacy, one built on climate action, advocacy, and personal truth. And he's doing it all without screaming for attention. Since the age of 14, Aiden has been a United Nations Environment Goodwill Ambassador, making him one of the youngest global climate activists in history. He speaks at summits, partners with NGOs, and runs sustainability campaigns like a pro. Why? Because for Aiden, purpose isn't an afterthought. It's purpose. But perhaps one of his most authentic moments didn't come on the red carpet. It happened during an Instagram live broadcast, filmed from his on-set trailer. During the broadcast, Aiden opened up about his relationship with authenticity, gently touching on the subject of sexuality, not as a label, but as a human experience. Being true to yourself includes being true to the planet, he said. Both are about preserving what's real and natural. That one, it went viral. It wasn't because he came out. He didn't. But because he reminds everyone watching that authenticity isn't about declaring who you are to fit a certain mold. It's about creating space for you to be yourself, no matter what that looks like. Pause for a moment. How many stars do you know who combine self-reflection and global activism in one sentence? From his eco-friendly red carpet style to his everyday choices, Aiden Gallagher embodies a purposeful way of life. He doesn't just support environmental causes, he lives them, inspiring a generation to care, take bold action, and think beyond themselves. For Aiden, authenticity isn't just personal, it's universal. And in that quiet strength, he reminds us that being true to yourself and standing up for what matters most often go hand in hand. He also started the Hollywood Youth Green Initiative, which works with studios to reduce waste on set. "We can tell powerful stories without destroying the planet," he said at the Environmental Media Awards. But what really makes Aiden stand out? His emotional intelligence, his gentleness, his letting his actions speak for themselves. While others are posting and performing, he's planting trees, mentoring youth, and quietly building bridges between fame and accountability. So let me ask you this. When was the last time someone inspired you without calling attention to themselves? Aiden Gallagher shows us that you don't have to be loud to be powerful. Being seen doesn't require being defined. And showing up, whether for the planet, for people, or for your own truth, is an act of courage in itself. He's not just a rising star, he's a steady flame. And the world is starting to take notice. Bradley Simpson isn't just a dominant voice on the British pop rock scene, he's also a quiet revolutionary in a leather jacket. When the world first discovered him as the charismatic frontman of the Vamps, behind the flashing lights and catchy tunes was a young man slowly discovering that fame wasn't just entertainment. It could be empowering, not just for himself, but for the quiet fans who saw their fears and hopes reflected in his lyrics. As Bradley transitioned from band member to solo artist, something changed. His music became more personal, his lyrics more thoughtful, and his public presence more intentional. He didn't start a movement, he didn't stir up controversy, but in subtle and powerful ways, he began to show up for a community that was often overlooked. In interviews, he spoke out in support of LGBTQ+ youth. In concerts, he proudly waved rainbow flags. And in moments off stage, the quiet, untelevised ones, he listened to fans share stories of identity, fear, and self-discovery without flinching or judging. One moment that remains with fans is when Bradley paused a sold-out show to hug a young girl sobbing in the front row. Her sign read, "Your music helped me come out." He didn't say much, he just held her hand and let her cry. That silence? That's where friendship comes from. Bradley has never publicly defined his identity, and he doesn't need to. Because what he's built is bigger than a record label. It's a platform where anyone, gay, straight, questioning, or somewhere in between, can feel seen. In an industry still struggling with diversity, he pushes for inclusivity in his touring lineups, music videos, and even his brand partnerships. He chooses collaborators who reflect the world he wants to help build. A world where every fan feels like a protagonist. Offstage, Bradley doesn't seek attention, he directs it. Instead of chasing headlines, he quietly supports social causes, speaking out for LGBTQ+ youth programs and mental health initiatives. He's been spotted at charity events and benefit concerts, not for publicity purposes, but because he believes music should mean something when the applause dies down. In interviews, he often emphasizes the power of storytelling, how a song can make someone feel seen for the first time. He's highlighted queer artists on his playlists, mentioned them on tour, and supported inclusive projects behind the scenes. There's no slogan, no campaign, just a quiet commitment to creating space. Because for Bradley, being an ally isn't about saying the right thing once. It's about showing up, time and time again, when it really matters. For Bradley, allyship isn't a seasonal occurrence. It's woven into the fabric of his career, in the way he carries himself, the way he treats his fans, and the way he creates spaces where they feel safe to be themselves. While others show support, Bradley practices it. In every retweet of a fan's story, every private message of encouragement, every moment of presence at a meet and greet, it's not about proving anything. It's about being the person you can count on when the music dies down and the world goes quiet. So ask yourself, when was the last time you felt seen by someone you don't even know? For thousands of fans, Bradley Simpson is that person. Not because he speaks the loudest, but because he listens the deepest. And in a world that often demands showmanship, he offers something better: peace. Imagine growing up with one foot in one world and the other in another, balancing identity, culture, and dreams. That's William Gao's story, both profound and powerful. At just 22, William has captured the hearts of audiences with his breakout role in Heartstopper. With his natural ease on screen and charisma off-screen, he not only plays the role, but also breathes life into it. But behind the applause and attention lies something deeper. A young man determined to build bridges between cultures, communities, and heartbeats. Born into an Anglo-Chinese family, William once described identity as a house you're still learning how to decorate. He didn't just let that complexity linger. He embraced it, making his bicultural story a part of every role, every public speech, every Instagram post. So when William enters the conversation about LGBTQ+ visibility, he's not just standing alongside others, he's standing within the community. He's spoken openly about the importance of representation, not as an abstract idea, but as a lifeline for young LGBTQ+ Asians who are watching, waiting, and searching for themselves. Have you ever found refuge in someone else's story? That's the gift William brings. He's also the one who picks up his guitar after every show, recording bilingual covers that combine Mandarin and English lyrics, almost like a gentle hymn to inclusion. And he does it on purpose, because in the silence between the chords, there's a space for someone to feel less alone. But William's work extends beyond acting. Through the band Wasia Project, which he co-founded with his sister Olivia, he explores identity in a deeply personal way. Their music blends classical, jazz, and alternative pop influences, often drawing from both Eastern and Western roots. It's not activism in the traditional sense, it's presence. And for the young, queer Asians listening, that's powerful. William has also spoken openly about masculinity, tenderness, and breaking stereotypes. He doesn't consider himself a leader, but in choosing roles like Tao Xu, singing in Mandarin and English, or simply being himself, he brings authenticity. No slogans, no chasing the spotlight, just a quiet, constant presence that says, "You are not alone." Even in his personal life, William remains diverse. Raised in a mixed British-Chinese family, he embraces both cultures, in his art, his fashion, and his voice. His choices don't shout, they whisper. This is me, and that's enough. He's not trying to change the world with one bold move, but for every young person who sees him on screen or hears him in song and ends up feeling a little less invisible, he's making a difference. At just 28, Omar Apollo isn't just another indie pop artist cruising the online music charts. He's quietly redefining what it means to be seen, heard, and felt in the music world, especially for young queer people still finding their voice. Omar doesn't come in with a spotlight, waving banners or shouting slogans. Instead, he offers something equally radical, an authenticity wrapped in melody. Long before headlines tried to define him, Omar was singing truths others dared not whisper. His lyrics speak of longing, vulnerability, and love between men, not of controversy, but of the human experience. "I sing what I live," he once said, and in doing so, he's opened up a space where listeners, especially young LGBTQ+ people of color, can finally breathe. Have you ever heard a voice and felt less alone? That's the power of Omar Apollo. His music isn't political, but it's personal. And sometimes, that's the most powerful form of protest. But Omar's story goes beyond the sound waves. Behind the spotlight and fashion editorials, he's made real strides. He's donated sales to LGBTQ+ youth shelters, supported queer creators on his platform, and spoken out against anti-LGBTQ+ legislation without ever turning the moment into a performance. Even in interviews, he's soft-spoken, thoughtful, but unwavering in his truth. He never uses labels to pigeonhole himself or others. He simply shows what it's like to live free. And that's liberating in itself. His fans see it too. Countless DMs and comments speak to the impact he's had. "You made me feel seen. Your songs helped me come out. I cried the first time I heard you say he in a love song." He doesn't just make art, he makes connections. Even in fashion, Omar understands the power of visibility. Whether he's wearing a silk blouse or wearing bold nail polish on the red carpet, he challenges notions of masculinity without saying a word. What if simply expressing yourself is a protest? For Omar, that's often true. He also creates space for others to rise. You'll find him reposting work from queer indie artists, collaborating with emerging LGBTQ+ talent, and staying deeply connected to the community. While other stars are chasing algorithms, Omar stays true to what matters, making music and moments that bring people together. And let's not forget the quiet power of his presence. As a Mexican-American artist who sings in both English and Spanish, his queerness isn't just personal, it's cultural, generational. He's showing young people from conservative communities that vulnerability and strength can exist in the same body. So let's ask this. Have you ever seen someone who reflects a version of yourself that you didn't know was possible? Omar Apollo may not consider himself a role model, but for countless queer teens, especially those who never thought they'd be in the spotlight, he is. And as this video continues, remember, we're not just telling celebrity stories, we're sharing blueprints for courage. Because every voice matters, especially the voices that dare to be soft in a world that demands protection. So who will be the next young star to turn quiet strength into a legacy? Let's keep going. What happens when one of the world's biggest Gen Z stars decides to stop performing and simply exist? Noah Schnapp didn't set out to become an icon, but sometimes the world hands you a spotlight, and you have to choose what light you want to reflect back. Noah's journey in Hollywood began like a fairy tale. He was 11 when Stranger Things exploded into pop culture, and his role as Will Byers, a boy hiding more than just secrets from the Upside Down, made him a breakout star. But off-screen, Noah lived a life of mystery. For years, interviews swirled about his personal life. Rumors swirled. Still, he remained silent. Until one afternoon in 2023, when he accidentally posted a TikTok that said it all. "I guess I'm more Will than I thought." No drama, no press release, just sincerity and a small smile. That post wasn't a headline, it was a moment. For millions of young people, especially LGBTQ+ young people dealing with fear and invisibility, it felt like someone reached through the screen and said, "You're not alone." But Noah didn't stop at being seen. He started showing up. Not in loud, showy ways, but in quiet spaces that really mattered. Donating to queer mental health programs, partnering with inclusive brands, speaking out in interviews about how Hollywood was changing and how he wanted to help lead that change. His message was clear. Coming out isn't the end of your story. It's the beginning of your confidence. He talked about how his co-stars, especially his closest friends on set, helped him feel safe. Being out gave him strength, not fear. And being gay didn't narrow his identity, it simply expanded it. I'm also an actor, a student, an entrepreneur, he said. Being gay is just one part of who I am, but it's a part that I'm now proud of. And Noah isn't just stopping at self-reflection, he's turning that self-reflection into action. In 2024, Noah continues to come out, not with fanfare, but with purpose. He has used his platform to amplify the LGBTQ+ community, speaking out frequently in interviews about the importance of safe spaces for queer youth. He has praised organizations like the Trevor Project, which advocate for mental health support and awareness. On social media, he shares stories from fans who have felt empowered by his coming out, letting them know they are seen. In a world that often reduces identity to sensationalist headlines, Noah has reframed it as something deep, calm, personal, and courageous. With each appearance, whether it's in a panel discussion, a class, or just a conversation, he reminds people that coming out isn't the end of the journey. It's the beginning of choosing how you want to live. More than just an icon, Noah has become a beacon that you can be yourself and still take up space in rooms that once seemed closed. He doesn't claim to have all the answers, but through his honesty, openness, and steady presence, he's offering something more important: hope. He's redefining influence for Gen Z. It's not about the audience, it's about the impact. And Noah's impact isn't felt in a loud moment, but in the quiet reassurance that someone like him, someone like you, deserves to be here too. So let us ask you, what's your version of showing up? Because courage isn't a one-size-fits-all norm. And like Noah, you don't have to be loud to be powerful. Joe Locke didn't come to Hollywood by accident. He came here on a mission. At just 18, the Isle of Man native has become a symbol of courage, not because he wanted to, but because he had to. Playing Charlie Spring in Heartstopper was more than just a breakout performance. It was a reflection of the life he lived, the fears he once carried, and the hope he now shares with millions. When Joe came out in 2022, it wasn't a sensational tweet or a tabloid headline. It was carefully worded, as if he were a friend, not a celebrity. He talked about navigating life as a young gay man, about being told to wait until you're older to come out, and about the silences that follow when your truth is deemed too much too soon. But Joe didn't stay silent. He chose to speak up not just for himself, but for all those who have not been spoken to. What sets Joe apart is not just his talent, but his gentleness. He's not loud, but he's powerful. In interviews, speeches, and school visits, he talks about being gay with a vulnerability that invites others to join in. He speaks openly about the need for inclusive education, mental health resources for gay people, and the freedom for children to grow up without shame. Not because it's trendy, but because it's personal. Off stage, Joe has used his rising status to challenge the silence that still surrounds gay youth. He speaks up for LGBTQ+ youth who are being bullied, and he appears at Pride events, not just as a guest, but as a voice of understanding. And when his fans, many of them still searching for themselves, tell him their stories, he listens, he shares, he supports. Because he remembers what it was like to need someone who wouldn't look the other way. Joe continues to speak out, using interviews and social media to highlight LGBTQ+ visibility and mental health awareness. He celebrates Heartstopper's representation as a space for queer youth to see themselves. He also criticizes outdated policies like the Isle of Man's ban on gay men donating blood. In every public appearance, from thoughtful comments to candid interviews, Joe reminds us that being true to ourselves is not only personal, but powerful. Being real in front of millions isn't easy, but Joe does it on purpose. He turns moments into movement, scenes into safe spaces, fame as a force for good. He's part of a new wave of stars who understand that true power lies not just in fame, but in using that fame to protect others. So when we say Joe Locke changed the game, it's not just because of Heartstopper. It's because he stopped pretending, because he made the truth awesome, because he looked into the camera and into the hearts of millions and said, "You are good enough." Now tell me, have you ever felt seen by someone you've never met? If Joe Locke is a voice of quiet strength, then Kit Connor is the storm he never expected, but still weathered. Together they brought Nick and Charlie to life in Heartstopper, creating one of the most tender love stories Gen Z has ever seen. The film wasn't just a hit, it was a mirror. And for many gay teens, it was the first time they felt seen, not as stereotypes, but as people worthy of love, patience, and happiness. In real life, Joe and Kit are more than just co-stars, they share the burden of representation. But while Joe found his voice in the glare of advocacy, Kit was thrust into the spotlight under much harsher conditions. At 18, Kit Connor was hailed as a Gen Z icon, confident, handsome, and incredibly talented. But with fame comes expectations. Fans loved him for playing Nick, a bisexual teenager on screen, and soon they wanted answers off screen too. The online speculation turned ugly. Strangers scrutinized his actions, his photos, his friendships, treating his real life as a puzzle to be solved. And when he didn't deliver, some fans became cruel, accusing him of queerbaiting, lying, hiding, as if his entire worth depended on a label. Then came the tweet, "Back up, I'm bi. Congratulations on forcing an 18-year-old to come out." It was just 14 words, but it resonated more than any interview or headline, because behind that tweet was a teenager. One whose privacy had just been taken away, one who deserved time but wasn't given it. And yet, what happened next was unexpected. Instead of fading away, Kit stood firm. He kept acting. He kept appearing in Heartstopper. He kept being honest about his limitations, about the pressures he faced, and about the dangers of turning identity into a performance. And in doing so, he spoke up for something deeper. The right to grow up, slowly, safely. For so many young people, especially gay young people on similar paths, Kit's story resonated with them, not because he came out, but because he reminded them that they shouldn't come out until they were ready. Because he proved that courage doesn't always have to be loud. Sometimes, courage comes when your story isn't yours anymore, and that's why Kit matters. He didn't set out to be an icon, but he became one anyway, for privacy, for activism, for quiet strength in a noisy world. His courage wasn't wrapped in rainbows and hashtags, it was woven from the silences he broke, the backlash he endured, and the calm he chose to carry on. So let's take a moment, not to ask questions, but to honor the answers he gave in his own way. And if you're listening, Kit, know this. You didn't just come out. You made it through, with more grace than the world deserves. Joshua Bassett never spoke, but somehow the world listened. Long before headlines and hashtags, Joshua sang truths that most people weren't ready to say. His songs read like diary entries, tender, honest, and brave in their vulnerability. But behind the lyrics was a young man trying to understand himself in real time while millions watched. And that journey, as messy and beautiful as it was, became a quiet revolution. In early 2021, in an intimate interview, he smiled, shrugged, and said 6 words that sent the internet into a frenzy. "I guess this is my time to come out." There were no rainbow flags, no press releases, just a moment of unconfirmed honesty. But as expected, the internet rushed in, demanding more clarity, more certainty. What exactly was he? Seriously? Is this a phase? But Joshua never owed anyone a label. Instead, he continued to do what he had always done, lead from the heart. In interviews, he began to speak openly about love in all its forms. In performances, he dedicated songs to the LGBTQ+ community with the slogan, "Love who you love unashamedly." At concerts, he hugged fans who cried in his presence, not because he was famous, but because he made them feel seen. He no longer sang for himself. He sang for kids who felt like they didn't belong. And when his faith community turned against him, he didn't fight back with bitterness. He redefined what spirituality meant to him. He stood up for his truth and told his fans that they were perfect just the way they were. He faced brutal online harassment, canceled campaigns, and public misunderstanding. But instead of falling apart, he turned his pain into purpose. He became an unwitting advocate, showing what it means to walk through fire with grace. Through it all, he stood firm in his music and his message. You are enough. In a world that often demands that young gay people scream to get noticed, Joshua did something bold. He stayed soft. He showed that masculinity doesn't have to mean toughness, that identity doesn't have to come out in a press conference, that support can be a song, a smile, a moment of genuine empathy. He didn't join the movement with a billboard or a brand deal. He joined with compassion, an emotion that lingered long after the music died down. And maybe that's what makes him so special. He's not trying to be an icon. He's just trying to be true to himself. So if you're watching this and wondering where you fit in, maybe Joshua's story is the sign you need. That uncertainty doesn't make you weak. That loving without apology, whether quietly or loudly, is one of the bravest things you can do. Take a moment to appreciate artists like Joshua, who remind us that support doesn't have to be loud. Sometimes it just has to be genuine. What does his journey mean to you? Last but not least, Cooper Koch enters this story as a quiet, steady, and surefire fire. He may not shout, but he shows up where it counts. And sometimes that's more powerful than any headline. While some young stars find their way into the spotlight through controversy or confession, Cooper has chosen a different path, one built on consistent choices, quiet strength, and a relentless dedication to inclusive storytelling. He doesn't burst onto the scene with a flashy PR moment. Instead, he comes with initiative, earning his place by showing up, standing tall, and doing the work. His role in They Them isn't just a breakthrough, it's an act of unity. By choosing to star in a film that focuses on queer stories in a genre that has traditionally been exclusive, Cooper helped shift the horror narrative away from fear of the other and toward a celebration of survival, identity, and belonging. The film isn't perfect, but his presence in it sends a message, one that many young LGBTQ+ viewers heard loud and clear. You deserve to be a hero. You deserve to exist without apologizing. And behind the scenes, that message continues. Cooper champions projects where queer characters are more than sidekicks or icons. They're people, layered and human. Whether on set or in interviews, he's always taken the initiative to lift others up, not downplay them. That quiet support system? It's more important than we think. Because for every young person watching from a place where queerness is still questionable, someone like Cooper can be a lifeline. He doesn't fly a rainbow flag for attention or spout cliches about diversity. Instead, he leads with authenticity. By listening, by learning, by choosing meaningful scripts. He understands that being an ally isn't about talking big, it's about being consistent. And in an industry that still has a long way to go, he's proof that a determined heart can move mountains. In interviews, he rarely focuses on himself, but when he does, his voice is clear. He speaks with respect about representation, he lifts up stories that aren't just about trauma, and he reminds young actors, queer or straight, that gentleness and initiative aren't weaknesses. That's a strength, especially in an industry that often confuses numbers with value. And that's the quiet magic of Cooper Koch. He doesn't claim to have all the answers, but in a world full of noise, he's a reminder that sometimes the most radical thing you can do is simply show up, be open, and be authentic. As we close this chapter, we invite you to pause and reflect, not just on the words spoken, but on the impact left behind. Cooper may be the last person on our list, but his message remains. Change doesn't always come from the spotlight. Sometimes it starts with a choice, showing up, standing up, and being true to yourself. So if someone like Cooper Koch has made you feel seen, safe, or inspired, hold on to it. And who knows, maybe pass it on to others. Because even the softest voices can carry the farthest when they come from the heart. These 10 young stars aren't just shining in Hollywood, they're lighting the way for others to follow. Through their quiet courage, bold choices, and heartfelt support for the LGBTQ+ community, they've proven that authenticity can change everything. Their stories remind us that friendship isn't always loud. It's consistent, intentional, and powerful. And in a world still learning to accept differences, their presence speaks volumes. If their journeys resonate with you, don't keep it to yourself. Share this video, leave a comment, and let's continue to work toward a world where every young voice can shine, no matter who they are or who they